All right, we're online now. Cool. So I hope you're all doing great, and you had some time to look through databases. We're going to have a quiz as usual. I'm going to start presenting. After the quiz, also, if you just give me a second. Yeah, after the quiz, also if you have questions regarding the databases before we jump into a completely new topic. So yeah, prepare those beforehand. So meanwhile, let's start the presentation. So in today's lecture, after the quiz as well, we're going to learn about some JavaScript front-end frameworks, like what are those and where they're used. Then we're going to learn some main concepts of React.js, and then we're going to get some hands-on experience with React. And then, yeah, we're going to learn some practicalities, like what is React hook, classes, and then we're going to discuss about the group project. So also, since we're going to spend 3 lectures in total on React, we're going to take it slow and really going a bit through details. Yeah, so I guess let's get started. I see there's only 15 people online. Yeah, well, it is what it is. I suggest you'll join now. Let me get the link. Give me a second. And yeah, just in case, I'm also going to copy the link of the meeting in Slack. Maybe someone forgot or... All right. Anyways, you also see the link on the page, so you can start connecting. Are you guys connecting or?
Strange. It show for me it's connected already.
Yeah, for me too.
For me too.
Huh. Are you able to like join now with a name or something? Like, can you put in your name?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, I'm gonna do a refresh real fast. I think it's because I changed Wi-Fi's while this was on. So, yes, there we go. Oh, okay, that's a lot of you. Okay, also some more people joining. So let's give them a minute. Yeah. Cool. All right, 12 people. Okay, I guess we'll start like that. Yeah, it's just some questions on theory about databases, just to refresh your mind, nothing really much into details. All right, let's start the quiz. First question. So which type of database is most optimized for storing the humidity level in multiple regions over several years? Let's say in multiple countries or areas of a country. Yeah, so which one is it? Would you prefer an SQL database, a graph database, a time series, or a document database like MongoDB? Everyone answered. Time series, nice. So most of you got this one right. So yes, so any kind of social media data or any kind of values that you are looking over a very long time with a high granularity, a time series database will give you the fastest querying speed and the fastest processing. Okay, question 2. What do you call the definition of the structure of the data accepted in a database? So what's that called? Is it a collection, a schema, a query, or is it a JSON? Okay. All right, yeah, so that is called a schema. Collection is something, you'll get a question on that a bit later. Yeah, so it's called a schema. For the people who picked JSON, maybe it might be confusing because sometimes you can define a schema in a JSON format, but JSON is nothing more than simply a data format. That's it. Okay. What type of database is MongoDB? NoSQL, time series, SQL, or graph? Nico, I think your mic is on. Nico 7. Yeah, okay, so yeah, pretty much everyone got this one right, okay. Question 4. Can a MongoDB database have multiple collections? Get ready, yes or no? That's an easy one. 50% chance of getting this one right. And the answer is yes. Okay, good job. Question 5. Does a MongoDB collection require a schema? That's a tricky one. So no, it's optional. Yes, it's mandatory. No, it cannot have a schema. Okay. All right, so no, it's optional. It is not mandatory. So that's why it's called a NoSQL database. But you've seen in the last lecture that we were defining schemas before adding objects to a collection, because eventually that is well, it's a good way of keeping your data up in shape. Okay, and the last question. What is Mongoose? Yeah. So is it a type of a database? Is it a cute looking animal? Is it a JavaScript library interface with MongoDB? Or is it a programming language? An animal, yeah. No, no spoilers, please. Okay, everyone has answered. So there were 2 correct answers. Yeah, because a mongoose is also a very cute looking animal. Just to humor you, I'm going to Google mongoose and I'm going to show you how it looks like. That's how he looks like. So a lot of times, you know, software developers and people in the tech world, they are out of names, of cool names to come up with. So they start looking at all the names of animals. So I guess that's how mongoose took its name. Cheating, yeah. All right, so I see the same recurring names every time. Good job, everyone who sees his name on the screen. Yeah, I guess you got all of them right. Good job. So before I start going into React and starting to discuss about the front end and so on, would anyone want to maybe have some comments about the last lecture of databases, or has some burning questions or something that you think it's relevant to ask? Otherwise, we move on. Anyone? Okay, because we can also leave that in the end of the lecture if, yeah, maybe your inspiration comes back. Okay, so let's get started again with web page development. So forget everything that you learned so far. I'm joking. Is that a beer or a wine in a wine glass? No, that is a beer in a beer glass. That's how people drink beer in this side of Europe. Okay, so let's start. Again, a fast history of the early web development. So we already learned in the very first lecture, we learned that yeah, HTML was the first language created for web pages. And HTML, it's a very simple markup language. You just define things and you see yeah, things are rendered. Very straightforward, but soon enough, people felt like there should also be some logic being programmed and so on. So 3 years later, people came up with JavaScript, which is now basically, you already know, the standard language for the web. And 2 years later, CSS was created. So all these languages, they were created one by one. Plastic Okay, yeah. So each of these languages has been created one by one, and it's not like people, when they created HTML, they had in mind that in 6 years someone is going to come up with CSS, or that someone is going to make a programming language that will come packed with your web page. So that was definitely not something that was thought of in the beginning. So these technologies now, they have always sort of developed in parallel. So as you can see, soon enough, people realize that, yeah, it's kind of a bit strange how you always have 3 different engines, one responsible for rendering, the one for logic, the one for all the styling stuff. And you've seen so far that when you're making web pages, it always feels like you have to define all these connections every time. So, you have a specific variable or data entity in HTML. You then have to, again, redeclare it in JavaScript, and then you have to say that you're making that connection. So, yeah, obviously people came to the conclusion that something has to be done about that. Yep, so next slide. Yeah, so again, so what happens in your browser, I guess it's not a surprise for you anymore, is that, yeah, you've seen how you would connect your HTML static code with JavaScript. So we've seen that we do that through IDs, which is, quite straightforward and easy enough, especially after you had some practice. It's very simple when you look at example like the one here in the in the slide. You just have one single paragraph, and it has an ID, and you find that specific paragraph, and you put you input its you change its properties. However, you've probably noticed that when we started working on slightly more advanced pages, like the to-do list, or I think even the same, the very first assignment with the cache, you've noticed that things become challenging, and also that there's no one clear structure. I mean, yeah, of course, it's JavaScript, but you didn't see any clear structure on how exactly you should, for example, list a bunch of paragraphs, or put a list of bullet points. So yeah, soon enough, the code becomes really, really complex and messy. And especially, yeah, now imagine one of those projects is an actual, let's say, production project, like something that makes money and people pay for. And now imagine that new developers have to come in and deal with that code, and then other developers have to understand that again. So it obviously becomes quite a challenge. So that's why JavaScript in the very beginning, it didn't get a very good reputation. It's because things were really messy. Okay, so soon enough, quite later, I would say, so starting from 2010s, people started creating JavaScript frameworks. So before I go in these 3, the well-known ones, you maybe heard about jQuery or Lodash. Has anyone heard about jQuery or have used it?
Yep.
Okay. Would you like to describe, for example, like what do you think jQuery is? Like, how do you see it? What is it?
It's a framework, and it's really easy to use. Like create expressions, or create some difficult code by easy way.
Yeah, so the main idea of it was to easen up the work of front-end developers, and it allowed you to do a lot of general stuff in an easy way. Like, for example, making draggable objects. I think nowadays it's still always fast to do with jQuery. Or, for example, making the connection between the IDs and like HTML IDs and JavaScript variables. It's like one line shorter, you could say. So a lot of, basically, this library was developed as time went, and every time there was like a new challenge in the web browser world, every time there was a new challenge, jQuery was sort of coming up with a solution. However, jQuery still didn't solve one of the big problems of web development, which is a folder structure and a sort of a way in which you deal with large projects. It's eventually, it's just a library to help you out to take some shortcuts in your code, but it's still not like giving you a standard in which you would develop your web page. So that's why nowadays jQuery is still considered like it's still a library which is used, but most of the project managers or any kind of like web development company nowadays would actually not start new projects using jQuery. Yeah, so why everyone hates jQuery? So developers, they always like the newest stuff. So every time something becomes old, they would say that old stuff is not necessary anymore. So that's how the developer world works, I guess. But in reality, it's simply like one of those packages which is slowly getting deprecated. And one of the PHP. Yeah, so PHP, it seems to be going in the same kind of way. Yeah, so another thing about jQuery is that a lot of people learned jQuery since it appeared. So it's like a standard for them. So they're always used to add this huge library by default when they only need, 2 or 3 things, something like that. So yeah, so that's why a lot of people would say jQuery is not good. I mean, it's still something nice, especially if you, let's say, you work for a client and his webpage already uses jQuery. Just go for it. If you need to make a small change and your responsibility stops at the point that you're just developing something for someone, just go for it. But if you're working on a project which you have a stake in it, like you really want it to grow, and also you will have to maintain it afterwards, yeah, don't start with the jQuery. It's simply not something that you will see in the near future. Now, back to the JavaScript frameworks. So yeah, in the 2010, I guess, yeah, so Google came up with Angular. And what Angular was, actually, before I go into each of them, the reason for frameworks. So yeah, simplified workflow, like to have a more standard way of developing web pages and arranging your folder structure. So that being the second point. Large capability of dynamic content rendering. So this might sound sophisticated, but in general, this is about so let's say when you have pages where everything is dynamic, like a button will appear under a certain condition, a list will scroll down automatically when a request comes in, or, messages should pop out on left or right. So all this dynamic content rendering, so managing all of that, it's much easier with these frameworks. A community that constantly develops new tools for better code development. That's, of course, always good, like in any kind of, any open source project is like this, so you always win the fact that the community always improves everything. And a very, very important one, which web developers had a big hassle back in the days, cross-browser compatibility. So now it's quite easy. We're using like 2-3 web browsers in the world. Like there's Chrome, there's Firefox, there's Edge, I guess, and what was it, the one from Mac, the Safari, yeah. And most of them, they run on kind of the same engine. Firefox uses a different engine, but for example, Edge and Chrome, they use the V8 engine. So nowadays, this is still not a huge problem, but back in the days, you had so many more browsers, and like not everyone was always updating to the latest version and so on. So when you would write the HTML and CSS and you would go into like fancy stuff, like making draggable objects or making some specific animations, like CSS animations, each browser had, you could have had a very different experience. So you're like, for some browsers, like specific JavaScript functions would all of a sudden not work, or also there were like a lot of mobile browsers. Now you have Chrome on mobile and Safari on mobile, but back then, I think Opera was a browser, and then you would most of the times use the browser that your phone manufacturer gives. So browser compatibility was a huge issue, and sometimes, like how any web page, half of the time was spent on figuring out those small details. While here, when using frameworks, when you build your code, it will be compatible with, like, let's say 99% of the web browsers in the world, right? Like it might not run on your old Symbian Nokia phone, but it will still run very similarly on any other browser. So that's, the out-of-the-box cross-browser compatibility. I still use Opera. Why? I'm really wondering why. you can meanwhile write why, because I really don't know why. Anyways, so Angular was the first framework to appear. Obviously, people also didn't like it in the very beginning. It wasn't. It seemed like it didn't solve. It maybe solved some of the problems, but it created a lot of them as well. It was created by Google, but it's still an open source project, and people are contributing to it daily. The general thing, what you have to know about Angular, it's for some reason preferred by larger corporations. That's my take on it. Eventually you actually have way more files, I would say, than in the case of any other framework. It's still advisable to be used for huge web pages. Like if you would start, let's say, making a social media, the next social media app or something like that, you would use something like Angular. It has a very clear enforced folder structure. So that's why a lot of developers really hate Angular, because you just want to add a new button on a specific page and you have to redefine that button in a lot of places. So simplified workflow, not a better organized project structure, yes. So that's about Angular. The next one, I'll go through to Vue.js. So Vue.js, it's a true open source framework, because this one was started by Google and they still have most of the influence on where the framework should go. But Vue.js, used a lot by startups. Yeah, some people still call it like a very experimental framework. I would say it's really quite mature nowadays. It has some sort of future. It's very similar to React, I would say, and you're going to get some details on that. So yeah, for example, if you open LinkedIn or any kind of job website, if you write any of these names, you'll still find really well-paying jobs anyways. So it's good to start with one. You definitely shouldn't know all of them. Yeah, and now React. So the one that we're going to learn, it's much simpler in use than Angular for sure. And the main thing that React solves is the simplified workflow. So it's the idea that you shouldn't, if you have a component, let's say like a smart component, a button that does an action, or a text input, let's say a password input that will tell you, that will throw you an error if something is wrong. Yeah, virtual DOM, we'll get to that as well. So, so what React tries to do is that if there is a logical component that you define, you only have to do that once, and you don't have to go edit some HTML and some JavaScript. And you're about to see what kind of magic they came up with to solve all of this. Yeah, so this is in general about frameworks. There's like 2-3 other well-known frameworks this year's. I don't even remember their names, honestly, but a lot of them will come up. But these are the ones that survived through, well, the past nearly 1 decade, so to say. Svelte, yeah. So Svelte is also something known nowadays. Some people are super excited about it, but any framework or language, if it doesn't have a big community yet, yeah, you're gonna have a hard time using it. Next, let's start with basic concepts in React. So this is things which, some terms which you'll have to learn and like as you use React throughout your project. So the main, so everything in React goes around the thing called components. So every time you make a new piece of, it can be a simple button, checkbox. It can be a group of things. It can be a card which contains a title and some tick boxes or so on. So React pushes you into the direction that you make components out of everything. And there are more advanced components which contain multiple smaller components. So everything is like in a parent-child kind of structure. Everything is part of something. So those are called components. You're going to see how that looks in code. But yeah, it always enforces you to look at things from that perspective. The next thing is props or properties. Props are static properties given to a component before it's created. And usually props refer to, it can be a color of a button, a number of lines somewhere, width and height of a grid. Yeah, I've written that there. So today, we're not going to learn much about props and what are those, but just at the abstract level, think about let's say you make a component, which is a card, and it has two properties, and one of them, for example, is the background of the card or the height of it or something like that. And one of the simpler props is the style, which is pretty much the same as style in HTML as you used before. But it will get clear much more in the coding phase. The next thing that we're going to learn more today is state. So state are some sort of variables which describe in which state a specific component is. Okay, so these are, in fact, it's nothing really fancy. The state variables are just simple JavaScript variables which can change throughout the running of your code, and when they change, something has to change in the visual rendering. So those are state variables. So for example, if you want a button to become red when clicked, then you define like a state variable which becomes true or false, and based on its value, a specific button that button becomes red. So that's about state variables. Properties of component that change dynamically after the component has been rendered. So so state variables are pretty much that. The next thing, which is the main magic, which I mentioned about React, making it so that you don't have to redefine logical components in multiple places. It's something called GSX. So GSX, it's JavaScript and XML, and actually it's JavaScript and HTML in one single file. And that's something that the other frameworks don't really give you. What it'll be again clear once you look in the code. But what JSX allows you is to define static HTML code, and then inside that HTML you put some escape characters, and inside them you can define like JavaScript code functions, variables in such a way. You'll see it in the code, but that's the main idea. So that's JSX. And the other thing is lifecycle, or more clear, component lifecycle. So any component, be it a button or card or something more advanced, each component has multiple events throughout its lifecycle. So for example, an event is when the component was actually rendered. Another event can be when the component has changed in a specific way, or when the component is unmounted, maybe you want to run a specific JavaScript function. So React allows you to attach different JavaScript functions to different lifecycle events of a component. So for now, before I move on, any questions on, let's say, on this more abstract level about React? Anyone? Is it so clear? Or it's very confusing and you're just waiting for more clearance, I guess? Yeah, all right. It's okay. All right. Theoretically, it makes sense. Yeah. Theoretically, it does. Okay. Now, was that the plan, actually? Give me a second. Yeah, we're going to actually start with our first React web page. And I suggest if you want to follow some of the tutorials next to me, you can start doing these things right now, because what you don't like about React. What I don't like about React. Yeah, it's a good question. What I don't like about React. Yeah, it's a very detailed thing, but one thing about React is that too many files. No, you'll see that based on compared to other frameworks, React does not enforce you to use a lot of files. But one of the things is the way data is sent between components. So it always enforces this parent-child connection between components, which sometimes it becomes difficult when you have to send data up in the tree and back. But that's something you're gonna get into those issues much later. Re-rendering. What do you mean? Is in re-rendering about React? Okay, I suggest we just go into the details, into the coding part. I am going to, so I opened a new folder. Nothing really special here. So I'm going to follow exactly what is being said to do here. So yeah, we all should have Node.js and NPM installed on your local machine at this point. And the very first thing that you have to do is to install something, create React app. So this will do two things. It will install, so take care of this G argument. So what the G argument means in NPM is that you want to install a package globally. And what that means is that you don't simply install it in a folder inside this project of yours, but you install it on your local machine. Like when you start other projects, you can reuse it. And create React app is not only that it installs the React library, but it immediately creates like a boilerplate, or like it creates a template of a starter project in React. So most of the people starting a React project will start with this. So after you install this one, you then have to go to a folder, anyone that you want, where you want to start your project, and you are going to run the following command. Let me try to do a bit of zooming in. You're going to run npx. So this command, you'll have it once you install this. Otherwise, it will tell you that the command is unknown. Create React app. And then you give it the name of your project, my page. And I'm going to press enter. And this is going to go in a very, in a rather long loop of just downloading a lot of libraries. It has a lot of dependencies. This is JavaScript. So meanwhile, this is going to run. Let's make sure it actually does. Anyone else planning to? Oh no. Yeah. So it can't have apparently you can't have an uppercase letter. Yeah. So keep that in mind as well, I guess. Okay. Let's make sure it runs, and then I put this on the side. Mm-hmm. It's really taking its time. Why? Give it a second. Okay. Anyone else trying to follow this next with me, or do you prefer to do this after the lecture, the coding part? There's at least two people. Then we go more in details into this. Otherwise, yes. Cool. Nice. All right. So yeah, as you can see, this installs a lot of libraries, a lot of packages. It already created the package.json, and you'll see it starts to slowly create a small, let's say, project development environment. So after the lecture now, go through all of these commands, and you'll have everything up and running. Meanwhile, let's see if it makes sense that we can move on while this installs, because otherwise I might just open a project that I already have. But it's always best if I do the steps exactly like you will do them, I think. Let's see if I can maybe go through some theory before. No, I don't think it makes sense that we go much ahead. Then what I suggest is that while this installs, let's again come back to whether you have any questions about databases or about React so far. So there should be at least 5 minutes that we can talk about it. So bring it on.
How do we solve searching on a website for a database?
Searching on a website. So you mean like, can you give a more specific example? So
I have a blog, and there are many blogs, and I want to search for blogs that have this title. Mm-hmm. And is it done for the API, for the server, or?
Yeah, so ideally you'll slide, please. Sorry. Yeah, so ideally you never let a client from his from the web. I was trying to read something else in parallel. So ideally, you don't want a client to have direct connection to your database, like ever, never. There are some experiments now being done where people try to create databases which are kind of directly accessible by the client, but this is something very experimental and very new. How it looks nowadays, it's rather there's a lot of frameworks that allows you to do the searching, but in general, if you want to build your own one, it's really not that difficult. So let's say the front end, you have a text input, right? And with that text input, let's say you want like a very nice search like the Google one, where you type in a new letter and immediately get a lot of references. So let's say you are searching in a blog post and the blog post has titles and probably some text. What you do every time you type in a new letter, you're sending an HTTP request, like an API request to the server. The server takes in that piece of string. And then what it does, it pretty much it depends on what kind of database you're using, but you can do partial matching. You can match either that text exists in any of the entries of a specific collection in some keys, right? So it'll search for, okay, all the titles. Basically, you send the server sends a query to the database where it says, I want all the blog post entities to look in the keys of title, and if they have a partial match with this string. So that's and if you get something back, you take the top 10 partial matches and you take their title, send it back to the client. And in the client side, you can then, next to your text input, you can have all the entries. And then you can continue typing, and this cycle happens multiple times. But it's also very important that you do something called caching. So every time on the client side, you already typed certain letters, you already pre-save some of those searches in the front end web browser. Because you don't want every time to, I hope I answered your question. Yeah. Cool. What is the difference between yarn start and npm start? So npm and yarn are very, very similar things, and they were very different back in the days. But now, you can find a lot of posts about it. In general, it has absolutely the same purpose to help you. It's a package manager for JavaScript. That's it. And honestly, they both use a package.json. They both work in very similar ways. And some old school people, they love Yarn. Some other people like NPM. Honestly, it doesn't matter. It does the same thing. So that's it. Let's see how we're doing here. Nice. So the project folder has been created. So this is our first React web page. Let's try and zoom in. Let's first take a look on what was created here. The node models folders, you already remember this one. It's a huge folder which has all your JavaScript libraries that you never have to touch. So just like with any JavaScript project created with npm, you'll have that folder. Nothing surprising. Looking here, we have a package.json and we have a yarn.log. So both things are responsible for keeping up the list of JavaScript packages that you have imported. That's pretty much their main purpose. So yeah, that's about it. You've seen them before. Git ignore. I think I didn't go much about GitHub throughout the lectures. Git ignore. It's .git ignore. It's a very simple file where you put a list of folders and files which you do not want to be uploaded on GitHub. So the way this file works is very simple. Every new line, it's a new, except for the ones which use this hashtag as a comment. Every new line, it's a folder or a specific file or a string matching kind of pattern, which will say that this specific files should not be uploaded to GitHub. So obviously, you never want your node modules to be uploaded on GitHub. Okay, the next one is source, and we're about to go through some of these files. So source is where you will have pretty much all your web page being developed. For now, today we're only going to make a single page application like we did mostly so far. Next time or next time, we're going to learn how to make an actual web page with navigation and having multiple sub pages with the query and so on. So for now, we're going to write everything in one single file again. And then there's a public directory, and this public directory has some very specific React things. So starting with the fact that there's a manifest.json. This file, the reason why there's a manifest.json file here, you describe basically the logo of your web page, the description of it, in such a way that this is something to do with something called progressive web apps. Someone says, so it means installing React comes with Git. You don't need to initialize Git on your React app. Well, it only comes with a git ignore. You then, when you commit this to an actual GitHub repository, it will make use of this git ignore to know what stuff should not go there. Coming back to the manifest.json, if you heard about the concept progressive web apps, this is the idea that somewhere in the future, people predict that we're not going to have an Android market or an iOS market for applications, but you're just going to have links. So the idea is that with React and all the new frameworks, when you make a web page, your phone can already understand it as an app, and if you save a link of your web page on a phone, you can actually save it, and it looks like an app. It's something rather new, but yeah. So what else we see? The robots.txt. This is something for the Google engine when it finds your page to know how it appears on Google. But this is already some social media management kind of stuff. So, and the other thing, what you're going to have in public, this is going to be any kind of files like assets, images, or stuff that you want to, files which are hosted directly to your client. But this will come quite later. Here, we see these two files. They are quite useless for now. We don't take a look at them. We see a logo. This is just something used in this example. Index.js, this is the very main file that you usually don't touch. And this file, what it does, it looks for basically the root of your document, and it starts rendering things there. That's all you have to know. It's nothing really special. Your actual application is in app.js. Let's actually run to see what is this example. So this is what all the people starting a new React project, they'll pretty much go through exactly what I'm showing now. You do npm start in this folder. You click enter. I know package.json. I have to actually go to that folder. So cd my page. So now I'm inside that folder, and I'm going to do npm start. So now we're going to run the development environment. So it will automatically make a mini web server. It is going to compile our files. 1 second. Yes, it is going to compile all those files, and it's going to host a very simple web server on port 3000, as we can see here. I can do the... Yeah, and what we see here, we just see some logo animation going around, some text, and a link to go to Learn React. And all of this is described in this one file right here called app.js. And we see, okay, it's a JavaScript. I'm using, So what we see here, it's a JS file. It's a JavaScript file. We see the importing. So this is like the modern way of importing, other libraries. It seems to be importing a CSS file, an image. And then later you'll see that you also can import JavaScript files here. And then we see a function. It has a name, and it returns something. And the confusing part, you see that, okay, it's a JavaScript file, but inside the JavaScript file, we have something that looks like HTML. And this is pretty much HTML, most of it, because if I copy paste this in an HTML file, I think most likely it will run, except for this part. And we're about to get there. And to make it simpler, because this has quite a lot of stuff in here, we're going to do the following. We're going to delete absolutely everything. We're going to even get rid of this class name. And here we're going to do our typical header, hello world. We're going to save this, and we see that every time I save, it detected that I changed the file, and the web page has refreshed automatically without the necessity of doing that. So why do we import the CSS file? I'm going to get there as well. Keep in mind, as I mentioned, that what they try to do in React very much is that you get rid of the necessity of defining components and logic in multiple files. So this JavaScript file, in fact, it's in a JSX format, which allows you to have the HTML and JavaScript all together, and you can also redefine CSS throughout it. But yeah, we're about to we're about to see that. For now, we're actually going to get rid of all of this as well. We're going to start with this very simple example. So hello world, nothing special here. Now, let's make a paragraph. Yeah, save again, nothing special. We're just declaring things. Now, to prove you that you can run JavaScript in this HTML, I'm going to show you how this works. So basically, anywhere inside between tags, you can open and close a curly bracket. And what you can do in this bracket, you can actually return a piece of JavaScript. So if I do 5 + 5, we see this is a paragraph 10. Okay, cool. HTML doesn't allow you to do that. We can, what else we can do? We can now, inside this function, we can declare a simple, a simple variable, const my name. We can actually put that variable inside here, and we see that it appears, right? So now let's think about what, in order to do this, what did you have to do back when we were just using HTML and CSS separately? You had to create an index of this, right? You had to search for that index in JavaScript. And then in that index, you had to say that I want to keep everything that's inside. And then I want to keep that, plus add a specific variable there. So that's what you had to do back then. But now, it's very simple. Wherever you want JavaScript, you just open and close the brackets. And you put just variable names or functions that return something. Yeah, so this is not the main magic of React. This is just the first thing, which is called JSX. How do you escape? Oh, how do you escape? Good question. Honestly, I never thought, I never really needed that. I think something like this. Honestly, yeah, just Google it. I think there's a way to escape it. If you need curly bracket, then yeah. Actually, a very easy way that I would use, it's doing something like this. If you need to really draw a bracket, this is, yeah, that would be the way. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if it works, right? Coming back to the slides. Okay, so this is show me the way. Yeah, so yeah, this I already explained. So the first React app, what you should see on your screen if everything was installed correctly. Next part, we're going to learn about state variables. Let me think if it's best that I simply open. Yeah, we'll just continue in this. As you see here, I don't have any library that I imported called React, but now we actually have to import it because we're going to use some of its functionalities. Now, just to make things faster, I am going to open my other project on the side so I can copy paste stuff faster. Let me think, was it here? Yes. So this is the code that you have already on GitHub, so you can later experiment. So we are going to import the following thing. So we're going to learn about the use state functionality from React. So what use state is, what I explained it before, is that a state variable is a JavaScript variable that does some modification to the way in which something is rendered. So what we have here, this is a component. So this is our parent component called app. Later, you're going to have other subcomponents and so on. But even like your main page, it's also considered a React component. So the component called app, what we're going to do now, we're going to create a state variable inside it. And this is the construction. This is how you have to create such a variable. You declare a const, you give it a name, and we're going to call it my number. And then I'm going to explain you what this is. Set my number. Okay, so now to explain you what components are stored in functions. So components are functions, if that makes sense. Yeah. So and they can also be JavaScript classes, but that's something I'm going to go in the end. This is the way that people use React nowadays. There are some other ways, but let's focus on this specific example. So what we created here, we created a state variable called my number, and what the second thing is, this is in fact a function, and every time we run that function, every time we run it with an argument, that argument will become the new value of my number. So the reason you don't simply declare a variable, it's because with this construction, React can pretty much understand when a specific change has happened to your variable, and then it knows that it can re-render things. So I'm about to show you, maybe it becomes more clear, hopefully. Let's in the beginning create a button here. Right, so we have the button right here, and now we can do on click, and just for fun to show you again how JavaScript can be integrated directly. This is something like this, but much OP, right? Yes, I guess you're right. Okay. Now you remember how you were attaching functions to your buttons. Now I'm going to show you how I do that inline in HTML. I'm going to create a new function. For now, we're just going to make it print something. So what we see here, I open the curly brackets because now I'm going back to the JavaScript world. I am declaring a very simple inline, thick line function, and I make it print just a piece of text. I save it, and this is within HTML. Now I open this, Control-Shift-I. Let me change my sensitivity. This mouse is going everywhere. So every time I click, I see that this is being printed in the console. So this is pretty much how you would do an on-click. A more professional way would actually be to declare another function here. So inside this component, you will, let's say, we're going to call this function on button click, but it can be called whatever you want. I just call it like this for now. And I'm going to say that this function is equal to exactly this. So now here, instead of declaring the function in line, which sometimes it's okay, but most of the times it's good that it kind of comes out, so you can see the structure of HTML much easier. But what I can do here, I can just simply copy paste this variable name, which contains that function. So hopefully nothing surprising. It does the same thing. Yeah. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to, let's say, print out the value of this number. So the number is curly brackets, and we put this variable, we put it right here. Okay, we start. Yeah, nothing happens. We just see the value of 0. If I make this, let's say, 5, then the initial value of my number will be 5. Every time, this is a normal JavaScript variable with some exceptions. And let's say if I want to print its value every time I click in the console, I see it's 5. So yeah, a very simple JavaScript variable that you do exactly what you could do with any other variables. However, because we declared in this specific manner with a use state, it means that this number can have an effect on the way our web page is, our component more specifically, it's rendered. So now if I want to, let's say, increment the number every time I click a button, then I'm going to do, so the classical way how you'd have done this, you'd say that my number equals my number plus 1, or my number plus. And then you would actually have to search for that paragraph by ID, all right? And then you would have to take all of its text and then remove it except for that last part, and then pretty much put in that number there. So that's what you do classically. And what this will give you an error. First of all, my number is a constant, so that will already not work. But the way you would do it in React, you do set my number, and you give it the new value. And now, just for the sake of it, I'm going to put a static value just to show how this runs. So initially, the number is 5, and when I click it, the number becomes 10. All right. Now, if I want to increment it, then what you do, set my number, you take its current value, plus 1, save, and yeah, we want to restart this. And now every time I click, the number increases by 1. There you go. Okay. So this is, in very simple ways, what a state variable is. So it's a variable that you declared in this specific way. You can put it in different places throughout your HTML. It can be a string, it can be an object, an array, a Boolean, it can be whatever you want. Now we're going to, so these variables, you can also use them in different places within the tags. But now I'm going to show you a way in which you can do some other changes. Let's say we want to make the button either green or red, okay? So we're going to create a new variable in the same specific way. We're going to call this one current color. We're going to do set current color. And now we're going to, let's say that the initial color, it's like, I don't know, red. So this would be like a very simple red. And now, instead of incrementing a number and printing that out, we're going to remove this paragraph. What we're going to do, inside the button, you can access the style property. Now this will be a very interesting thing. Instead of just using plain CSS or the way you're doing style, you can actually define a JavaScript object, a JSON kind of object, with each of the style properties of your component. So we're going to write background, was it background? I think color as well, it's preferred. And we're going, in the beginning, let's say that the button will be, I don't know, like grayish, some gray, dark gray color. Yeah, So nothing special here. So this is just a static property. Yeah, let's focus on one property for now. But now I can actually give the color to be a variable, a JavaScript variable directly. So this way you kind of like use JavaScript to make programmatic CSS. Yeah, another magic thing of React. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to run. So I see the button is red. Nothing happens when I click it because we haven't programmed anything for it to do. So yeah, so there you go. So this way we can actually do some logic on on the style. Like you can also make it that its position moves every time you click it or whatever, whatever you need for your use case. But what we're going to do now, on the on button click, we're going to make a very dumb function, which will say if current color is red. You know what? We could just use normal names. Yes, we can actually just write red. Yeah. So if current color is red, we're going to set the current color to green. Else, set current color to red. Pretty much. Very simple dumb function. And now what is going to happen is that when I click this button, I check the value of current color and I see that it's red, and then I'm going to change that state variable to green. In the meanwhile, what React takes care of, something that before you had to do the rendering yourself, while here it always runs sort of in parallel, your React engine is going to see that, yeah, one of the state variables has been modified somewhere in your code, so I have to render the button in a specific different way. I'm going to save this, and as you can see, every time I click, the button color changes to the other one. Okay, before I move on, any comments, questions? Is it this surprising for you? Does it feel like it's going to save you a lot of time? Anyone?
Can we do this in a CSS page?
In a CSS page? What do you
Yes, because usually you'd separate your style from your HTML and JS. That's why I was wondering if you can use a JS object or function in a CSS file. Have you used here?
Yeah, so there is something called CSS. I forgot its name. Yes, I think it's this. This is like programmatic CSS. CSS preprocessor scripting language. It's basically CSS on steroids. Yes, exactly. Me personally, I'm not much into styling. I guess you understood that by now. So this is one of the things used quite a lot. We see that, yeah, it's been released as well in 2018. This is something used quite a lot in when making very fancy, nice-looking web pages, and this is also something you can use in React directly. But there's two ways. You can either program it with JavaScript, so make that logic pretty much like how we did it here, something which normally is quite fast. But if you work with animations, or let's say if you want the gradient to move, like let's say you have a button with two colors and you want those to sort of splash together and so on, usually it's better to use a CSS preprocessor like that one. It'll be more optimal. But for very simple, typical programmatic style modifications, this is good enough, and it's used a lot. Yeah. All right. Another thing before I move on with React, something maybe a bit completely unrelated. If-else statements in JavaScript, they can also be written in one single line. So I'm going to now, just for the sake of it, rewrite this in a different way. So current color red. So this line right here will do exactly what this piece of code does. So this is, again, something for modern JavaScript. And if, yeah, it's something that will save you a lot of time from in different places. So the question mark and these two dots, the way it works is that first you can write a logical statement, and then after the question mark, you say what happens if this statement is true. And after the two dots, you say what should happen if this statement was false. So just to prove you, I'm going to comment this one out. I'm going to save, and yeah, there we see that the button still does exactly what we wanted it to do. Shorter. Yeah, good point. Yeah, you can also shorten that up. Like if it's not red, then you set it to red, but then you also need a place to say that it should become green if it's. Anyways, so keep it in mind, because I'm about to show you where this kind of constructions are used in React as well. So yeah, I really encourage you to use this from time to time. It's, yeah, especially if you're confident with if statements at this point, it's good that you move on. Yeah. Okay. Now, what would actually be a smarter way is that instead of encoding the color directly in your state variable, you just make this a Boolean. You know, this will be a false. And what you can do now, you just here on button click, you say set current color, and we're going to rename this to something more logical. We're going to say is toggled. Set is toggled. Yeah. Actually, let's make it more fun. Is red. Set is red. And we're going to say set is red. Basically, what this line does, it looks at the current value of this variable, and it will set the negative of it. So if it's false, it becomes true, and if it's true, it becomes false. And what we're going to do here, instead of saying that the background color should be exactly that value name, what we can do is we can say the following: is red, red. Otherwise, it's green. So what this statement does, you can also use these statements directly in your JSON. Like when you declare variables, when you add new values for your keys, you can do this in one single line. Now, just to prove you that this works, again, same button, red, green, red, green. You can use this construction even, so here we used it inside the style object. But now, let's say we're going to make a paragraph, and we're going to say the current color is. And here, what we're going to do, here we can programmatically say what should this piece of text be inside here. And what we're going to say again, is red. We're going to type red, and with big letters, why not? And if it's not red, we're going to say green. So take a look here, and we see that that text changes as well every time we do this. So keep in mind this, this notation, the question mark and the two dots. Another thing, another shorthand operation, which is also good. I'm going to make a new paragraph. We're going to say the current. We're going to say, okay, is it red? No, we're just going to say the text, okay, it's red. It is red. And we're going to only show this when the color is red. And we're going to take this variable, and we're going to use the and. Now, this construction you can use when you don't have two conditions, but you have only one condition. So you want this to be rendered, you want this to happen only when this is true. So coming back to this, So we see that this text appears only when the value of this is true, right? So yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Another thing is, like here, we're only returning strings. But what we can do, we can also return HTML components. Now, instead of just returning the text red, I can return, let's say, bold. Yeah. So this is also a very simple HTML tag saying red. Or maybe I'm going to make this green. We can even make this, let's say, a div if we want. Doesn't really matter. It's not mandatory that you return a string. You can even return another component. And inside this component, you can define even more logic if you need to, and so on. So again, just to prove you that this runs, there you go. So I either say that I print red as a bold HTML component, or I print green in a div, which by default it will go on your new line because there's no specific styling. So yeah, there you go. So that's how you connect your JavaScript to HTML in in React. Before I move on, any questions? Anyone? Is it so simple and clear, or no questions? All right. Okay. Mind blow. Yes, that was the same. Yeah, that was my same opinion when I first see this, for sure. Okay, so here on the slide, again, I have the same example with incrementing. Nothing really special. Now we're going to go into use effect. Use effect is, let's say, a piece of code, a piece of JavaScript function, let's say, that you wanted to run at a specific time throughout the life cycle of your component. Okay, this is the other thing. I'll only work on the stuff that we have here. So use effect, it's another function that you import from React. So that's how you do this importing. And use effect, the most basic use of use effect is that you want something to run when your component was just mounted. Mounted meaning that your component just appeared on the screen. Something that maybe some of you noticed or maybe had the problem with that when you're working directly with HTML and JavaScript is that sometimes you expect your JavaScript to find something in the page, but then it tells you it's not there and you're looking, but no, it's there. One of the things is that HTML does not appear directly on your page. It needs some time to preload and so on. So normally you want your JavaScript code to run after the component is actually on the computer screen and it's there and it's rendered. So I'm going to show you how in React do you run a piece of code that happens on the very beginning. And to put in some logic here, I'm going to get rid of all this style thing. We're still going to say that the button does something. I'm going to get rid of the style. Here, we're going to come back to this example where we are incrementing a number. And here we're going to say that the number is a number. Okay. So back to this example. And let's say that the initial value of this state will be 0. We're going to get rid of this one. So now, back to the very simple example. We have one state variable, one function that runs when this button is clicked, and then we're printing this number here. So use effect. This is how this function runs. So use effect takes as a first argument a function. I'm going to make a function. And the next thing, it takes something called, as you can see here, Visual Studio Code is quite smart. It already tells me that the second, so the first thing, it's effect callback. So callback, it's a function that happens at a specific event. And a dependency list is a list of either state variables or something in the future they're going to learn called props, or I think there were some other things. Basically, a list of cases when should this function run. And you should always give it at least something. It should be an empty array, at least. So if you give an empty array, what this means is that this function will run only once when you loaded the page or you loaded the component. Later, you're going to learn that this is a component. You can then put it in different places, a subcomponent. So the idea would be that this function will run when that component appears on the screen, right? So for now, we're just going to do a console log. I have appeared. We're going to save it. And now we see here in the console right here, yeah, I should clean everything. Every time I refresh, the very first thing that appears, yeah, I have appeared. So nothing really special here. For example, you can say that you want a specific variable, yeah, the my number. We want this to set to 55. That means that by default, when I just start my program, whenever this happens, my number will be 55. So it is 55. The button still does what it has to do because this has ran only once. All right. You never want to run code like here. Even though it appears that you're able to do, but if I print out something here and I save it, we see that for some reason, that text appears when I click a button, right? Keep that in mind because that might create you a lot of headaches. So if I put any kind of code here, like let's say a const x equals 5, console log x. Yeah, for some reason, this happens every time I click a button. Without going much into details what really happens under the hood, what you have to understand is that the React engine will not give a damn about any kind of code written outside your state variables or inside use effects or inside functions like this, right? So do not write code specifically like directly inside this functional component. If you want something to happen in the very beginning and you want it to happen once, this will be the construction. Another use of use effect is that maybe you want something to happen every time this state variable is changed, right? Maybe, and now it's obviously a very simple example, but later you have a very, let's say, like complex set of events in your web page and so on, and you don't care about what really the user does, but what you care about is that every time my number is modified, I want something to happen, right? So I'm going to say my number has been modified to, and yeah, we're going to put its value. Why not? Save this. So yeah, every time I click it, I see that, yeah, my number has been modified to 69, 70, and so on. All right. So this is the use effect. And later, you're going to find more advanced use cases of how to use it, and you understand why it's really necessary. For now, it's a good place to start with, like, if you want a piece of JavaScript code to run beforehand. And again, what does the argument accept? Yes, so back again, the second argument, it's either empty if you want this function to run only once, or it has a state, or it has a prop, but that's something that we're going to learn next time. So I told you, like, we have 3 lectures to go through it, so we better take it piece by piece. So for now, there's these 2 things where you would use use effect. Let's see if we have anything more about the hands-on. I don't think so, honestly. Yeah, so again, the use effect either in the beginning or every time I update it. And that's pretty much it. The next thing is, yeah, something you'll can I have the state my number without the function? No, back to this. So that's the whole point. You can, no, that's it. Basically, a variable inside a React component, so this being a React component, if you want that variable to not be lost or have unexpected value, so to say, you want those variables to be declared like this. If you want variables outside, like you can go outside your component and you can define a constant or like one with a let. You can do that, right? You can do let x equals 10. But just to prove you why, so if there are variables which are not linked to the rendering of your page. Let's say if you just have some piece of data that comes from somewhere and you have to do something with it, you can declare those variables on top, like outside of this, and you can actually use them inside here. I can do, you know, console log x. I'm going to just do it like this. Every time I do click, it tells me x is 10. Now what I'm going to do, I also will say that x equals x plus 1. Yeah. Now we take a look. Yeah. X increments. And now, and now, let's say instead of using the state variable as we're supposed to do it, let's say we're just going to put x here. So it is not going to give me an error. We see that the number is 10, exactly what we have expected. The number is 10. And at the button click, we expect this number to increase by 1, and we print that number. And now, oh no, this thing doesn't increment. However, it seems that the variable is incrementing, so it is a bit confusing. So the reason for this is that when you declare variables like this with use state, the React engine knows that I only have to make a re-rendering of the page or of the component only when someone modifies this variable with a function. So every time this function runs, what in fact happens under the hood is that JavaScript is telling to this React engine, like, okay, this variable is changing. The React engine is checking, okay, is a new value different than the previous one? If the answer is yes, then you go through all this HTML and you find where is that variable, and you find it, oh, that variable is here. So I must re-render this specific piece of HTML and then give that to the user. So that's what happens under the hood. So you can still use this variable inside your code, no problem. If you declare that variable like this here, I think you might have a hard time, but you want to declare them outside. Yeah. So that's why you use this state if you actually want that variable to have some influence on your rendering. Next question, what does the last line of code do? If you're asking about this one, Andrei, yes. So this is something about Node or like JavaScript components. That's how you import libraries and you use them, and this is how you export them. If you look later at the whole project structure without going much into details, what we do here is that we package this as a React component in this case, and then it means that wherever this file is imported, whichever JavaScript file is going to import this, it will get what you said that it should get here. It will get app. App is the name of this functional component, app. So by default, this file will export that. Now, if we go to index.js, this is again the core file that you don't touch. If we go to index.js, we see that we import app from app, and then we are rendering it right here. So that's what the last line does. It exports it. In fact, since we have time now, I might just give you a really fast example. I'm going to create a new file, and where I'm going to call it, let's say, button clicker, with a big letter, button clicker.js. I'm going to copy everything here from app. And this is pretty much components. Yeah, I'll get to the other answers. So really fast now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new React component. And this is how you do it. I'm going to do this again next time, in case I will not make it quite clear now. But what I'm going to do now, we're going to actually have all of this in one single component. Just to make it a bit different, I'm going to say that margin, is there anything like margin color? No, it's border color. Border color, we're going to give it a red. We're not going to have the hello world. So what we're going to do now, we're going to make this, the button and the text, we're going to make this in one single component. My number +1. Okay. And we have to export this, and yeah, and we have to render this right here. What we're going to do now, I'm going to go back to my app.js. I'm just going to have a div with a hello world. I'm going to completely get rid of any other state variables because they have no, because they will have no use now. Now I'm back to the hello world example. Now what I'm going to do, so yeah, this is a very important one. How do you import React components? So your own React components. I do import the name of my component, button clicker, from, sorry, like this. And because I'm in the same folder, I do -- button clicker. So at this moment, I have imported this React component. I imported it in my JavaScript library. At this moment, nothing happens because I just imported it, but I didn't say what I want to do with it, like with any kind of software library. So now take a look at the magic. I'm going to copy this button clicker inside an HTML-like structure. I'm going to save, and boom, I see all of this now. Just 1 second to understand, to show you how this is separate. I'm going to give a different background color to this. Let's say, I don't know, gray background. There you go. So all of this together, it's my app component, and this is my button clicker component. So this still does all the logic that we wanted it to do. And now let's say going back to app.js, do I want maybe 2 or multiple button clickers? I'm just going to copy multiple of them. Taking a look here, and what happens? I now have separate button clicker components, and each of them have their own state, right? And I only declared this once. So maybe this already gives you a bit of imagination of what you can do later with your with that list assignment. Like you can now imagine in your head how you'd have done it much easier, right? Because you only declared the logic for one single thing, and then you just multiply that a lot of times. With plain JavaScript and HTML, it would have taken you, even if you're like really good programmer, it would take you a lot of time because you kind of have to declare an array to keep the value of each of them, and then you need another array to maybe, I don't know, you've seen it how it was done. So definitely in way more lines. But what we did here, we just declared a component button clicker with the logic that we've defined, and then wherever the hell we want this to appear, it will appear. You know, you want to put one of them in a, I don't know, in a div. Yeah, I want to put one in a div, and I want this, let's say in a very smaller width. Let's say like no, let's say. Yeah, there you go. So for example, this one specifically, I put it in a smaller container. So I see that this one is, all of a sudden smaller, but it's still that same component. It has the same logic, and it comes pre-packed with everything that you've defined previously. I didn't really plan to do anything about props, but since we're at it, really fast, a bit of a spoiler until next time, you can define something called props. So props would be any kind of variable that comes in here. One of them is style. So there are some props which are standard, but some of them, let's say I want to say starting number. And this prop, this name, I can then reuse it inside here to say what I want to do with it. So the only difference that I have to do is that in function, I declare a new variable, an argument called props. And then wherever in my code, I will use props dot this. And let's say I want that all the component, every time I declare one of these button clickers, let's say, why not use starting number? You'll see why, because they come packed in an object. So every time I do props dot, what was it again? Props dot starting number. Props dot starting number. This is how I get access to that variable. And basically, let's say that I want it to be initialized at that value. There's a much more use case of props. This is just a really, really fast thing. So another way, there's like object deconstruction where you can actually write starting number and then you can bring it here, but we'll do that next time. So props.starting number, and by default, and then another thing, so if I don't have this one, I want it to be 0. Another JavaScript short operation is that every time you declare a new variable, if you're not sure that this will exist, then you put the AND operator. And the second thing, this will be what value you want to be there in case this does not exist. So maybe some of you have been using this before, but yeah. I'm going to save. I'm going to refresh the page. I'm going to get rid of this one so they all look the same. So what I do here now, I say that I want 5 of these components, where one of them has a prop with a starting number 55. So after I refresh the page, I look here and I see that this one started with 55, and I can increase it and so on. And then those props later, you can have many of them. And those props can have an influence on the way, like, they can declare, they can define some of the style of your some component, they can define some of the logic, whatever the hell you want. But the main magic of React is that it allows you to have this file declared like this with its own logic, like it's a component, it's an object on its own, and then that you can import it by pretty much sticking it directly into your HTML. So this is this is how they found their way to solve the whole issue of it. How could we add the components programmatically? That already we'll do next time. Yeah, we'll do it next time. I'm not going to do it now, sorry. Importing, yeah. Let me think if we can do something. All right, anyways. Let me take a look at the slides. How many more are left? Let's do it like this. I'm going to finish with the last 2 slides, and then I think we'll have a bit of time, and then I can show you how do you programmatically add multiple of them. Yeah. All right. So what I've shown you was the modern new React framework. What you have to understand, like any other React framework, any other JavaScript framework, things have evolved over time. So it took really years until we got to this place here where you make things so easily, right? Until now, people were experimenting with class components. So a lot of times when you search for, when you're Google for, I need this help with React, a lot of times you might notice that people are using something called classes, like class extends React component. You see some of the things like, what else is different? Let me think. The way they declare the state, it's all of a sudden in an object. It's not the way that we do it here. So what it's important to understand is that every time that code looks a bit unfamiliar, not in a React way that you've learned in this course, you have to Google specifically something called React hooks. So use state and use effect. Those are called hooks. Honestly, I have no idea why exactly they're called like this, but I guess it's because they hook at a specific event in your program, or I don't know, honestly. But what here in this example is shown that these two things will do absolutely the same thing in React. They will render a button that shows you how many times you've clicked it. But this is the new way with hooks. And you see that you have way less lines of code and less complexity in your code. While here you see that there's a lot of things like that you have to declare, like constructor, super, state, and so on. So these are class components. These are like functional components. I think you can call them this way as well. That's pretty much it. Keep that in mind. You always want to be using the new modern way. I think that's kind of it about this slide. And now some things for you to explore for the next time. Yeah, definitely try to, there's a library in VS for that. Can you explain what kind of library that changes hooks to classes, or? Because if there is, then it will be great. Nikolai? No answer. Creating the structure. Yeah, I guess there's definitely I can suggest you. I don't have an exact component to tell you which one to use. I have several of them, but if you search in the marketplace here for React, not React Native, also maybe something important to ES7 React. 1 second. ES7 React. Yeah, I have it. So I think, I already have that. Cool. Something also interesting before I go into the last thing. You maybe heard about React Native. It is something quite different, but in the same manner you were making web pages up to now. Also, a big reason to learn React instead of Angular or Vue, it's because if you are good at React, you're like 30% ready to be a mobile developer. I mean, very simplified, but by using React Native, you're using React just like in the same structure that I've shown you. Only difference is that instead of having div, age, and all of that kind of stuff, there are some other components, header text, more like native to the mobile kind of screens. And in fact, what you see here, this gets compiled to a mobile application, either Android or iOS, that you can actually compile, put on the on the iOS market or Android marketplace, and it's an app, right? And you build it with this framework. And if you learn React, it will be actually like, for most of the people, less than 1 day of playing around to actually be able to start making cross-platform mobile applications. So yeah, a good reason to learn React, and it pays well as far as I know, if you specialize in that. Okay. For the next time, it would be nice for you to explore React a bit. Create a web page, try some state variables. Something I haven't shown much today is how to interface with the text input, radio button, checkbox. So like more like the cooler user inputs. I'll show that next time anyways. For the group project, it would be really cool if you actually start using React. If you make some kind of web page, First, for the obvious reason that it will save you like so much more time. I guess I've shown you all the proof today of that. And yeah, and secondly, you learn something new. And I think by the time you start actually working on the group project, you will, I mean, honestly, I think at this point, you can already, like after this lecture, if you do this tutorial, you will be able to do whatever you were doing up till now in web development, but with React much faster. So yeah, definitely try to apply that in the group project. The other thing is the expectation was that today already you have put in your names in groups. Some people requested that they want to do the project alone because they're busy. So yeah, my general answer to that is the following. If you already don't have enough time to do it on your own, to do it, basically, the more people, the more of the effort that you can divide between you, right? So try to find someone who you feel is also, let's say, responsible like you. One of the advices I told, don't remember who, for example, when I was in university in my master's degree, I was also working full-time next to it. And one of the advices that I got from an old colleague of mine was also trying to do these two things at the same time. At the university, try to find someone who is also working full-time, because you know that that person will respect his time as well. So if you're a person who has a very busy schedule, maybe you have kids or university exams or so on, try to find, you know, someone who also is quite busy, and you know that in 1 or 2 meetings you'll define everything and you'll be able to divide a bit of effort and really build something nice. So that's my suggestion to you. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, so there's already a bunch of groups. I see some groups already have project names. That's really cool. So yeah, the idea is that from today, you should already figure out which team you want to be in and the kind of a project idea. You should already have it in mind. The idea is that till next Thursday, try to plan 15-30-minute calls with me. So especially if you're a bit in doubt about the technology or about the effort or what you want to do. So let's have a short call separately, and you tell me, okay, we want to build, let's say, this, I don't know, this audio detector, or we want to build this fake web shop, or we want to build this learning card, whatever you want to build. You try to describe it to me. I'll give you some advice on what kind of libraries you might use, and also I can give you some advice on whether this is something realistic to make in some weeks, or you know, maybe we simplify it in such a way that it looks like something more or less finalized in the end. So yeah, I'm not going to give you exactly a schedule when to have those calls. Just write to me, and yeah, and I'll make sure that whoever writes to me, we have that call. I do not have much time nowadays, you probably noticed, to go specifically in your assignments so far. So that's also a very important thing. In the very end, when we give this certificates that we mentioned, if you shown in the final project that you worked on it, you understood it, and you described it in a nice way, then we're not going to start looking into have you went into the quizzes or have you submitted assignments, because that will already be proof enough for you, for your next employer, and for us, that you know full stack development to some degree. But if, let's say, you kind of failed to do anything for the final project, or you didn't make it in time or something, then we might then look at an individual case. And you might say, okay, I had a lot of exams and so on, but what we need eventually is a proof that you understand the basics of full stack development. So that means that you have to show an assignment where you either use a bit of databases, a bit of backend, a bit of front end. So pretty much that to-do list or grocery list, but with a whole stack. If you show that, that's good enough proof. But until then, I cannot spend a lot of time on the intermediate parts. Also, don't forget there's Itoro Bashi in the group. He's also willing to help from time to time if you have more specific programming questions. But until then, I'm really sorry for people who threw a lot of questions and I wasn't able to answer at that point. So that's about the course in general. So I told you to give the call to me to arrange that. And on next Thursday, we're going to spend, I don't know, maybe a third of the lecture. So you should create a one-slider presentation about your project. Ideally, it's one slide. It's 2 slides only if there's something really mind-blowing and very, very necessary. But the slide should have your project name, a 2-3 sentence description, and then you should talk about the, ideally, it's always nice that you just have some images, and you should cover the topic about, who is your target audience? Like, who do you imagine would be a typical person using your project idea or whatever you're building, and what would be, let's say, the business case? Like, would this be something that makes money, or is this something that brings a specific value in society? Like, obviously you're not going to make like high-end finalized apps ready to go in the app store and make money, but it should kind of like show, like, let's say I've seen someone wanted to make a personal wallet kind of app. Like, there's a lot of them now in the market, and if you make one of them, like, okay, it is going to be your project, but you can at least describe, this is indeed something that sells. This is something that, people are using. So, that's kind of the idea of this. All right, so that's in general about the group project. Any questions about the course and the group project, or any doubts or something? Anyone? No? So what we can do now, we have 14 minutes left. We can do 2 things. Other questions about React or anything? And if there's none, I'm going to show you really fast how you, based on an array, you make a list of components. So we can have dinner. I mean, if we can also leave some material for next time, that's also fine. So, okay, let's limit it to this today, actually. That would be the smart decision. Okay, one last round. Any questions? Anyone? If no, then that would be it then, I guess. Goodbye. I wish everyone a nice evening, and make sure you put your name in one of the groups. You don't have boys' glasses for beer? Boys' glasses? Happy holidays. Yeah. All right. Bye. Good night.